We're going to turn to Brian Becker now. We know Brian has to leave us. Brian Becker is joining us. He's the longtime coordinator for the Answer Coalition and a co-host of the radio program Loud and Clear. Brian, thanks for coming on. You've been in this business a long time in protests. Set the historical context, please, of what we're actually witnessing now.
I think in many ways this is unprecedented, what we're witnessing. Of course, there were the urban rebellions of the 1960s, starting in 1964 with Rochester, New York, where I was a child at the time. Harlem came shortly thereafter. There was Watts in 1965, Newark in 1967, Detroit in 1967. Of course, after Dr. King was killed, 120 cities basically went up in flames. The whole 56 years since the beginning of urban rebellions in the United States, the triggering event has almost always been a police killing or a vigilante killing, almost always. And for 56 years, the same time period, every time there is a rebellion against a police killing, a rebellion against racism, a rebellion or a fight back against the ruling class war against Black America, which has never ended. It started in 1619 and has never ended. Each and every time, the rebellion is defined as the work of outside agitators, without hesitation and with complete consistency. And in this case, we have the remarkable event that we have rebellions going on in 50 cities, and every mayor in 50 states, hundreds of cities, and every mayor says it's outside agitators. So obviously, the people who were living in New York went to some other place to carry out a rebellion, and the people in that city went to some other place. The ludicrous character of it is so obvious. At wartime, people are told, we're all Americans. Let's unite as a country. But when it comes to fighting against the war waged by police against Black America and Latino America, against poor America, when it's time to fight that war, you have to stay in your own zip code, apparently, otherwise you're an outside agitator. The real situation here, and the thing that we have to observe, is that this now 10-day-old rebellion has gone through many different stages and phases. I have been pretty much in the street for the past week, and so I've been able to observe and participate with large numbers of other people. In the first days, as the police tear gassed us, as they used pepper spray, as they hit people with batons, people ran. The second day, they ran. There would be almost stampeding. We'd be running down the street, people would be panicked. By the end of the second night, people stopped running. Other people started saying, slow down, don't run. And the people came back and they became more confident. They started to solve problems. They started to take care of the wounded. They identified agents provocateurs. They became like an organic community of resistance. And this steadfast development of these many, many organic communities of resistance on the ground, anchored in Black working class youth, but with many, many other people there. I mean, it's a remarkably multinational or multiracial, whatever formula you want to use, but anchored really in the Black community and among Black youth. This community of resistance, this organization of resistance, has been able to go up and stay up. On Sunday, the reason I want to go through this a little bit is to come to what I believe the ruling class in America really fears, what they really fear, and they are really scared right now. And in fact, that explains the fracturing going on around Donald Trump, where even James Mad Dog Mattis says Trump is a sinister force, partly to save his own reputation, but partly as an indicator of the ruling class's trepidations about what's to come. On Sunday in Washington, the police department, and this was with Muriel Bowser, a Democratic mayor in DC, went along with this. They allowed a small handful of people. I was in the neighborhoods, the small number of people who were breaking windows, doing some looting, and they let it play. They let it play and play and play. There were hundreds of cops all over the place. They didn't set up a police line. They let it play on Sunday night. And then on Monday morning, they had all the footage they needed to declare curfews around the country. And also that allowed Donald Trump to go and say, look, we're going to invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807, and we're going to use the federal US military to invade parts of the United States. In those states where the governors had been delinquent in using violent enough tactics to suppress their own demonstrations, we're going to invade the United States. And the moment he was doing that, that was that photo op right around the time of the photo op in front of St. John's Historic Church here in Washington, where in order to take the picture, Barr and Trump ordered the Secret Service and National Guard to carry out this violent assault against the media and peaceful protesters. Trump came out to show he's the tough guy. He wasn't the bunker boy, he was the tough guy. And when he did that, and on top of all of these curfews, the response of the masses of people was very decisive. By Tuesday night, 2 nights ago, instead of being cowed and intimidated, the numbers grew to the largest point yet. In Washington, it was 10,000 people in the streets, and they defied the curfew. And the same was true all over the country. And so what I think is happening, and this is why I think it's somewhat unprecedented, is that this is an enduring rebellion, and the federal government has been cast onto the defensive. Trump is in trouble right now. Trump is reeling right now. And elements of the ruling class who weren't that keen on Trump anyway, who feel he's a bad manager, he's not doing what Karl Marx and Frederick Engels said in the Communist Manifesto was the chief job of the executive, which was to manage the common affairs of the bourgeoisie. Trump was pretty much just focused on his own affairs. They'd like to get rid of him. And so the tide has turned right now against Trump. And at this moment, you see the same Democratic Party that was designating the demonstrators as looters and outside agitators 5 days ago is now sensing opportunity and coming back into the fold a little bit. And you'll see it in Washington. There's going to be a massive, it could be 100,000 or more on Saturday demonstration. And a lot of the same Democratic Party politicians who were denouncing our movement and the movement days ago will try to take the leadership of it. So they failed to defeat the movement in its stage of insurrection. The people stayed strong. So now they will try various methods of co-optation for parts of the movement. And that's what's going to come next. But this is going to be a tug of war because, of course, Trump is still mobilizing and would like to use the iron fist on the demonstrators. I think we are witnessing what is like a preview, a dress rehearsal in embryonic form of what revolutions actually look like. They're messy, they're not straight, one line, they have ebbs and flows. There's a core anchoring social force that is the real driver, the motor of the revolution. And at the same time, there are different organizations and entities and classes that are trying to put their stamp, their imprint on what this revolution or embryonic revolution or dress rehearsal revolution will actually look like and what its final goals should be. Bottom line is that we have a different kind of problem in the United States than exists, say, in Europe. In Europe, the government would have fallen by now. Trump would no longer be prime minister or the head of state. There would be new ministers. They would come out and say, we hear you, we were wrong, we need a change of course, we're going to make some significant concessions. Maybe like in 1968, when the Civil Rights Act of 1968 was passed just 6 days after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated and America's cities were burning. The government did something. But right now, this government, Republican and Democrats, are offering the masses of rebellious people absolutely nothing. Trump's not going to resign. There's not going to be a falling of the government. The Democrats are offering nothing. Joe Biden retains his position as the absolute mummy in the basement, whose basic pitch is that I'm not Donald Trump, hoping that that will be enough to get them the election, but not offering the masses anything. So we have an opportunity, but we have a fundamental problem for the left. The left has, because of the way the American electoral system is organized, there's no parliament. You know, Bernie Sanders or earlier Jesse Jackson would have had 20% of the vote. They would have had their own political forces. They would have had some influence in the government. All progressive forces are completely locked out of the government. The Democratic Party is clearly not a vessel for change. When Bernie Sanders looked like he might win, they crushed him. And third parties are not viable because each of the 50 states has organized the election system in a way that makes it impossible for third parties in America to win. So there's this unlike the rest of the world, the left has no organized voice short of insurrectionary politics, short of revolutionary politics. And that's really, I think, for the left, the big question. We have to, one, engage as we have been with the masses of people who are fighting, go through the same experiences with them, fight the same battles. We have to do that. We are trying to do that. In our case, in my organization, we have people in more than 100 cities who have been out in the streets nonstop for the last 10 days. But more than that, we have to be able to let the left's imprint start to show itself on the demonstrations with demands that link police brutality and the nonstop war against Black America with the system of capitalism. And we have to help integrate or merge with all of these new organizations that are forming. They're forming all over the country on the grassroots level among young people who are looking and forming their own organizations, but they don't have names, they don't have a political program. It's wide open, but it's this vast new canvas for revolutionary politics. So I think we're at a moment of, we're at a fork in the road, but it's the kind of fork we want to be at. COVID-19, as Richard mentioned, the 50 million unemployed, which was a policy choice. It wasn't because of the pandemic. The crisis of having Trump as president, and the crisis of a now new rebellion by large numbers of people anchored in the Black community, which has always been the motor force for progressive change in America. This represents a very new day, a new opportunity for the left to try to become strong once again. And that's actually should be, for all of us, it would seem to me, our top agenda point.
Brian, one question, please, before you go. One key point in every revolt seems to be when the state forces of violence, the police and the military, refuse to fire on the population, and in some cases even turn against the state and join the uprising. Do you see any possibility of that? Are there any signs of that happening already?
Well, you know, there are a few instances where the police have taken a knee, but that's just designed to sort of slow things down. That's not real solidarity. The police are the police. In revolutionary moments, rank and file soldiers who are from the working class can be won over. When ordered to shoot their fellow workers, they say no, and they turn the guns around, so to speak. I mean, that was the slogan of the left in World War I. And, you know, a lot of workers did that. Same happened in Vietnam when conscripted soldiers fragged their officers rather than go into battle. That's how many battles ended. They just killed their officer and went back to base. But the problem we have now, the police are the substitute for like a fascist terror organization in the United States. And the police cannot be won over, from my point of view. Yes, the police come from working class backgrounds, perhaps. The police have unions, but these unions are more or less semi-fascistic unions. The police, their job is to suppress the working class and to suppress oppressed communities. So I don't see any hope at all within the police. Inside the military, inside the Army, our organization, inside the Answer Coalition, we've done lots of GI organizing ever since 2002. And we've had active duty mobilizing in bases and even in Iraq and in Afghanistan. And we've recruited quite a number of soldiers and sailors and Marines. But that's all slowed down as the intensity of the conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan slowed down. So, and it's a volunteer, not conscripted army. So those are different, sort of way different than it was during Vietnam.
You mentioned Afghanistan and Iraq, and many police now are veterans of those wars, and they seem to treat the population as the enemy with a military mentality rather than policing.
Let me just say one last thing. I don't know if you all saw in Washington, the government brought in Black Hawk helicopters in these show of force maneuvers. So they came right down on us, like 50 feet over your head. And the wind and the dust was so great, you couldn't move. You were paralyzed. And these show of force maneuvers were perfected in Afghanistan, in Somalia, and in Iraq. So the point you're making, how it's not just the individual cops, but the tactics of warfare against oppressed people overseas have clearly migrated back to American police departments. I mean, Brian, this was amazing.
Yeah, now, Brian, you said that police were allowing looting to go on. And there have also been a lot of videos emerging where cops have been breaking windows of a jewelry shop, of their own cars. So what you're saying is they seem to be setting up excuses to be able to go in and crack heads then, to make it seem worse than it is.
They did that. But what I'm saying also is That was the big move on Sunday. We saw it exactly. We were analyzing it. We were out in the street. We could see it happening. But that was all the pretext for the curfew and also for Trump's invocation of the Insurrection Act of 1807. But it's failed. It failed. The most important point that I want to make, that tactic by the DC police, Peter Newsham, the police chief, it was the same thing he did on January 20th. Remember on Trump's inauguration? He let the so-called riot play for 20 minutes. None of the people who broke windows or who torched that limousine, none of them were arrested. The cops just let them go, but they had all the video. Then they kettled everybody else, and they charged them with a felony riot, and people were facing 10 to 70 years in prison, and that took 2 years to win that case. We thought the same thing was going to happen Monday, and it almost happened. But what stopped it was Trump overplayed his hand with that photo op, and that turned the tide. So masses of people who are on our side took it as an opportunity to come back into the streets. So the effort to create this martial law has actually stalled out.
Well, Brian, thank you very, very much for joining us. We know you have to go. So we will
Thanks,
now.
everybody. Nice
Okay.
seeing you.